The rain made the world outside the diner windows look like a smeared painting. Inside, the air was warm and thick with the smell of old coffee and fried food. She wiped down the last of the red vinyl booths, the cloth making a soft, rhythmic squeak against the formica. Her feet ached in a familiar way, a deep tiredness that was just part of the job. The clock over the grill ticked past midnight. The only other soul in the place was the night cook, a quiet man already lost in a magazine behind the counter. She was just the waitress. That's how she saw herself, and that's how most people saw her. She lived in a small apartment with windows that rattled, her life a careful routine of shifts, cheap groceries, and the quiet hope that something, someday, might be different. Her one escape was music. Not that she could afford lessons or concerts. It was a private thing. Sometimes, melodies would drift into her head, pieces of songs she must have heard somewhere, forgotten lullabies that felt like they belonged to someone else, out in the far corner of the diner. Next to a dusty plastic fern sat the piano. It was a joke to everyone, including her. An old upright someone had dumped years ago, its wood scarred, and its keys a mix of yellow and gray. It hadn't been tuned in living memory. A few of the keys, when pressed, didn't make a sound at all. It was just part of the furniture, a place where regulars sometimes left their hats. Finished with the tables, she felt the deep quiet of the late hour settle around her. The usual sounds, the hiss of the grill, the clatter of plates, the low hum of conversation, were all gone. It was just the hum of the cooler and the tapping of the rain. She walked over to the piano, not sure why. Maybe it was the silence that felt too heavy. She lifted the fallboard, the movement stirring a small cloud of dust that danced in the fluorescent light. She let her fingers rest lightly on the keys. They were cool and smooth under her skin. She wasn't a player, not really. She could pick out simple tunes, things she'd taught herself by ear. She pressed a middle C. The note came out dull and slightly sour, wavering in the air. She smiled a little. It sounded lonely. A feeling came over her then, a sudden clear memory that wasn't quite a memory. It was more like a feeling wrapped in a sound, a sense of safety, of being held, and a slow, sad, beautiful tune drifting around her. It was the feeling she sometimes got right before sleep, a ghost of a song from a time she couldn't remember. It was always just out of reach, but tonight, in the empty diner with the rain as her audience, it felt closer, almost as if she could touch it. Hesitantly, she began to press the keys, trying to chase that feeling. The first few notes were wrong, clunky. She stopped, took a breath, and tried again. This time, her fingers seemed to move on their own, finding a path. A melody began to emerge. It was simple at first, a slow, wandering line of notes. It was mournful, but not unhappy. It sounded like a story about something lost and dearly missed. She forgot about the broken keys. When her right thumb landed on a silent F sharp, her left hand automatically found a lower chord that filled the gap, making the silence part of the music. She leaned into it, her body swaying slightly. The sour notes of the untuned piano didn't ruin it. Instead, they gave the song a raw, ancient quality, like a voice cracking with emotion. She closed her eyes. The diner faded away. There was just the rain and this song that was coming from somewhere deep inside her, a place she didn't even know existed. She played a little louder, the chords swelling. It felt good. It felt like crying without the tears. For 2 minutes, she wasn't the tired waitress in a cheap uniform. She was a vessel for this beautiful, aching piece of music. When the last note faded, hanging in the smoky air, she let out a shaky breath and opened her eyes. She felt exposed, as if she'd been talking in her sleep. Then, a sound shattered the moment. A sharp crack of ceramic on linoleum, her heart jumped into her throat. She spun around on the piano bench. She had been so sure she was alone, except for the cook dot in the shadowy back corner booth. A man was standing up. She hadn't seen him when she came in for her shift. He must have been sitting there in the dark, perfectly still, for hours. A white coffee mug lay in pieces at his feet, brown liquid pooling around them. He was tall, wearing a long dark coat that looked expensive, even from across the room. His face was pale, his eyes wide and fixed on her with an intensity that felt like a physical force. He wasn't looking at her, though. He was looking through her, at the piano, as if he'd seen a ghost. The night cook poked his head out of the kitchen, a question on his face. The man in the coat didn't seem to notice. He took a step forward, then another, his movements stiff, like a machine that hadn't been used in years. The quiet of the diner was now a heavy, pressing thing. He stopped about 10 feet from her. The air grew cold. She could see the fine lines on his face, the shock etched into every feature. He was older, maybe in his 60s, but he carried an aura of immense power, even in his stunned state. This was not a man who spent his nights in diners. His gaze finally snapped from the piano to her face. His eyes searched hers, desperate and confused. When he spoke, his voice was low, rough with an emotion she couldn't name. It wasn't anger. It was something closer to fear, or awe, or a terrible, painful recognition. He pointed a finger, not at her, but at the space where the music had just been. Asterisk, asterisk. Where did you learn that? Asterisk, asterisk. The question hung in the air, sharp as the broken china on the floor. It wasn't a casual question. It was an accusation, a plea, and a demand, all rolled into one. She just stared back, her mind blank. Learn it? She hadn't learned it. It had just come out. It was hers, and yet, from the look on his face, it was clearly, undeniably, also his. I didn't, she stammered, her own voice sounding small and far away. I was just playing. No, he said, the word firm, absolute. He took another step closer. That song, that specific melody, those exact harmonies. Asterisk, where did you hear it? Asterisk, she shrank back against the piano, the edge of the keyboard digging into her spine. The magic of the moment was gone, replaced by a cold prickle of alarm. Who was this man? And what had she just done? The cook took a cautious step into the dining area. Everything okay over here? The man in the coat didn't even glance his way. His entire world had shrunk to this waitress and this broken-down piano. He was waiting for an answer, and his silence was more frightening than any shout. She looked from his intense, desperate face to the rain-streaked window, to the familiar, safe mess of the diner that now felt like a strange stage. Her simple, quiet life had just tipped sideways, all because of a few notes played on a forgotten piano in the middle of the night, and she had no idea what to tell him. The silence in the diner stretched out, thin and tight like a wire about to snap. The man just stood there, waiting, his eyes never leaving her face. She could hear the soft hiss of the rain and the low hum of the neon sign outside. Her own heart was beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs. I really don't know, she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. It sounded like a lie, even to her. It's just something that's in my head. It always has been. The man blinked, as if her words were a language he had to translate. He looked from her to the piano and back again, his expression shifting from shock to a deep, painful confusion. The night cook cleared his throat, a loud sound in the quiet room. Sir, you've broken a mug. You okay? That seemed to break the spell a little. The man glanced down at the shattered pieces at his feet, and reached into the inner pocket of his expensive coat. He pulled out a thick leather wallet, took out several large bills, and placed them on the nearest table without even counting them. It was far too much money. For the mug? And the trouble, he said, his voice a bit more controlled now, but still strained. He turned his attention back to her. "What is your name?" She told him. It felt strange to say it in this situation. It was just her ordinary name, but in his mouth it sounded like he was testing the weight of it. He nodded slowly. "My car is outside. I would like you to come with me. To talk, somewhere, less public." He saw the immediate fear in her eyes and held up a hand. It was a well-kept hand, but it trembled slightly. "I am not a threat to you. I swear on my life. But what you just played, it is the most important thing in the world to me. Please." The cook shifted his weight, crossing his arms. He gave her a look that said, "You don't have to go anywhere." She trusted the cook. He was a good guy. But she looked at the man's face. The raw emotion there wasn't anger. It was grief and a kind of wild, desperate hope. It was a look that had nothing to do with money or power. It was human and deeply lost. "Where?" she asked. "My home. It's not far. We can talk there. You can leave whenever you wish. I will have my driver bring you back here, to your own car, whenever you ask." It was insane. Going with a strange man in the middle of the night? But the memory of the music was still in her fingers, and his reaction was a mystery she couldn't walk away from. That melody had meant something to her forever, and now, for the first time, it clearly meant something to someone else. "Okay," she heard herself say, "but I'm telling my friend here your license plate number." A faint, sad smile touched the man's lips for a fraction of a second. A wise precaution. He gave the cook the information without hesitation. A few minutes later, she was sitting in the back of a car, so silent and smooth, it felt like they were floating above the wet streets. The man sat across from her, staring out his window at the passing city lights. He hadn't spoken since they got in. The driver was a silent shadow behind a glass partition. They drove into a part of the city she only ever saw in magazines. Tall, sleek buildings with dormers in uniforms. The car slipped into an underground garage that looked cleaner than most hospitals. They took a private elevator that went up so fast her ears popped out the doors opened directly into his home. It wasn't a house. It was an entire floor. The space was vast, with walls of glass showing a breathtaking view of the city and the river, the lights twinkling like fallen stars through the rain. But it didn't feel like a home. It felt like a museum. Everything was perfect, cold, and beautifully empty. There were a few pieces of modern art on the walls, but no photographs. No mess. No life. He led her to a sitting area, gesturing for her to take a chair. He didn't sit himself. Instead, he walked over to a large, elegant wooden cabinet. He unlocked it with a small key from his pocket. Inside wasn't liquor or fine china, but what like old books and folders. His hands were gentle as he pulled out a simple, worn-looking photograph frame. He carried it over and held it out to her. The photo was old, faded at the edges. It showed two young people, maybe in their 20s, sitting on a stone wall. A young man with a bright, easy smile, his arm around a young woman. The woman was leaning into him, laughing. She had a kind, intelligent face and long, dark hair. On her lap was a small bundle wrapped in a blanket. "A baby. That," the man said, his voice thick, "is me. A long time ago." He pointed to the young woman. "And this was my closest friend in the world. My only real friend. Her name was Cora." He paused, collecting himself. She was a light, a musical genius. She heard music in everything, the rain, the traffic, the sound of a door closing. She could make a cheap, out-of-tune piano sound like a symphony. He looked directly at her. "Like you did tonight." She stared at the photo. The young woman, Cora, had a warmth that seemed to glow even through the old photo paper. "The song you played," he continued, "is called Aria for a Sleeping Child. Cora wrote it. She was composing it while she was pregnant. She finished it the week her daughter was born." He touched the glass over the tiny bundle in the photo. "It was a lullaby. For her. It was never published. She never even wrote it down properly. She said it was just for her child. Only 3 people in the world ever heard it. Cora, the baby, and me. I was there, in their small apartment, the first time she played it." A cold feeling was spreading through the waitress's chest. She looked from the joyful face in the photo to the man's grief-stricken one. "What happened?" she asked, though a part of her was afraid to know. "A storm," he said, the word simple and final. They were driving to see her parents. "A bad road, a wet night. An accident. Cora and her husband were killed instantly." The room felt even quieter. She could hear the soft whisper of the air conditioning. "And the baby?" she whispered. "The baby survived. A miracle," they said. She was found, still wrapped in her blanket, perfectly safe in her car seat. He put the photo down on a table, unable to hold it anymore. But there was no family. Cora was an only child, her parents already gone. Her husband's family. They were not good people. They didn't want a newborn. The baby went into the system. I was just a poor student, then living on scholarships. I had no money, no stability to fight for her. I tried. I wrote letters. I made calls. But I lost her. I lost them both." He turned to face the city lights, his back to her. "I made a promise at Cora's grave. I would find her daughter. I would make sure Cora's music, her legacy, lived on. So I built all of this." He gestured vaguely at the magnificent empty apartment. "I thought money and influence would help me find her. I hired detectives. I searched for years. But it was a dead end. The trail went cold a long time ago. All I had left was the memory of that lullaby. I would hum it to myself, trying to remember every note, terrified I would forget it. It was my only connection to them." He turned back to her, his eyes glistening. "And tonight, in a diner I walked into because my car had a flat tire, I heard it. Not from a recording, not from a concert hall. From a broken piano, played by a stranger, played with the same feeling Cora put into it." He took a step closer, his question hanging in the air between them, softer now, but more profound than his shout in the diner. "So I will ask you again, not as a billionaire, but as a man who lost his family. Where did you learn that tune? Was it from your mother?" She looked down at her own hands, resting in her lap. They were waitress hands, a little rough from cleaning solutions. She thought of her childhood, a blur of different foster homes, kind faces and not so kind faces, but none that felt like this woman in the photo. She had no memories of a mother singing, no lullabies, but she had always had the song in her head, a song that felt like safety, a song that felt like home. "I don't remember my mother," she said softly, her throat tight. "I grew up in foster care. I don't have any pictures. I don't know her name." She looked up at him, seeing the hope in his eyes begin to flicker and fade into disappointment. "But that song, it's the only thing I have that feels like it's truly mine. It's like my oldest friend." He knelt down in front of her chair, so they were at eye level. There was no pride, no power in the gesture, just a desperate need to understand. "Would you?" He began, then started again. "Would you let me? Would you let me have a DNA test done? I know it's a huge thing to ask, but I have to know. I have spent my whole life looking, and you are the only clue that has ever appeared." She looked into his face, this stranger who carried a lifetime of grief, and guilt. She thought of the empty apartment, the locked cabinet with its single photograph, the song that had haunted them both for different reasons. It was crazy. It was impossible. But the melody was real. And so was the pain in his eyes. Slowly, she nodded. The word yes hung in the quiet, expensive air. It felt less like a decision and more like stepping off a cliff. The man's shoulders, which had been tense as stone, slumped in something like relief. He stood up, his knees cracking softly. He looked old in that moment and tired. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. "I will arrange everything. It will be done here, privately. You don't need to go anywhere." The next few hours were a strange, dreamlike blur. The man made a phone call, speaking in low tones. Within an hour, a woman arrived with a small, professional-looking case. She was calm and kind, explaining the process simply. A quick, painless swab inside the waitress's cheek. The same for the man. The woman placed the samples carefully into vials, labeled them, and left as quietly as she came. It was that easy to potentially turn your whole life upside down. "It will take a few days," the man said after the woman had gone. The initial storm of emotion had passed, leaving behind an awkward quiet. He seemed unsure what to do with her now. "You are welcome to stay here. I have many guest rooms." She shook her head quickly. The apartment, with its breathtaking view and deafening silence, made her skin prickle. It felt like a beautiful cage. "I'd like to go home, please." He didn't argue. He called for his driver. But as she turned to leave, he spoke again. "Wait, before you go. There's something I'd like to show you. Not for the test. For you." He led her back to the wooden cabinet. This time, he pulled out a large, flat portfolio, the kind artists use. He carried it over to a wide desk and turned on a soft, focused lamp. With a reverence she hadn't seen in him before, he untied the strings and opened the cover. Inside were sheets of handwritten music. The paper was yellowing at the edges. The notes were drawn with a flowing, elegant hand, and in the margins there were little sketches, a flower, a bird, a tiny, smiling sun. "These are hers," he said. "Cora's, the only pieces I managed to save from her apartment before everything was lost. These were her dreams." He leafed through the pages with a gentle touch until he found one. He slid it out and placed it in front of her. At the top, in that same beautiful handwriting, it read, "Aria for a sleeping child." Her breath caught. Seeing it there, made real on paper, was different. It was proof. This wasn't just a phantom in her mind. It had been born in someone else's. "Can you read music?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not really. Just the very basics. I play by ear." He nodded as if that made perfect sense. "Then don't read it. Feel it." He led her across the vast room to another door. Inside was a smaller, cozier space. It was a music room. In the center sat a grand piano, its polished black surface reflecting the soft light like still water. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Play it," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "Play it from here, from her heart to yours." She hesitated. This instrument was a world away from the diner's broken-down junker. It was meant for concert halls, for perfect, trained hands. "Not for hers. I can't," she said. "It's too much." "Please," he said. There was no demand, only a deep, aching need. For her. She sat on the plush bench. The keys were cool and smooth as ivory waiting. She placed her fingers on them, the simple movement feeling both familiar and terrifyingly new. She closed her eyes, trying to find that quiet place inside where the melody lived, and then she began. The first note was a pure, clear bell tone that seemed to hang in the air. The piano was perfectly in tune. Every key responded to the slightest touch. It was like speaking a language you've always known, but for the first time having the perfect words to say it, she played the lullaby. The same wandering, sad, beautiful tune. But here it was different. It wasn't haunted by sour notes or the ghosts of a greasy diner. It was whole. It soared. Her left hand found richer chords. Her right hand let the melody sing with a clarity that brought tears to her own eyes. She didn't have to fight the instrument. It was helping her, lifting the music up. Halfway through, something happened. The song went to a place it always did in her head, a little bridge, a few bars of questioning notes that felt like a gentle turn in a path. She always played it, though it felt slightly separate from the main tune. When she played that part now, she heard a sharp intake of breath from the man. She kept playing, finishing the piece, letting the last note fade into a silence that felt sacred. She opened her eyes. He was staring at her, his face pale again, but this time with a kind of awe that was almost frightening. "That turn," he said, pointing a trembling finger at the sheet music still on the desk in the other room. "That little bridge you just played. That is not on the page." Her heart sank. "I'm sorry. I must have remembered it wrong. I always add that bit. It just feels like it belongs." "No," he said, walking quickly to the desk and coming back with the sheet. He pointed. "Look, see here? The main melody ends on this chord." But Cora had sketched out a few notes in the margin, here in pencil. She told me she wasn't sure where the lullaby should go next. She said, "It needs a turn here, a little journey away from sleep, before it comes back home." She never finished it. She died before she could. He held the paper out. Next to the neat ink notes, there were faint, penciled scribbles. A few ascending notes, a question mark. They were rough, just an idea. But the idea, it moved in the same direction as the notes she had just played. "What you just played," he said, his voice filled with wonder, "is what she heard in her head? You didn't learn it. You remembered it. You remembered the part she hadn't even written down yet." The room seemed to tilt. She looked from the penciled ghosts on the page to her own hands. It wasn't just the melody she carried. It was the unwritten future of it, too. "How is that possible?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. He didn't answer directly. He just looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. He was no longer looking for Cora in her face. He was looking at her. "The DNA," he said slowly. "It will tell us a biological truth. But this is a truth of the soul. Music is memory. It lives in the blood and the bones. She sang this to you when you were too young to form memories of her face or her voice. But your spirit remembered the song. It remembered the road she meant for it to travel." He put the sheet music down carefully, as if it were made of glass. Would you play it again? The whole thing with the bridge?" She nodded. This time, when she played, she wasn't afraid. She played for the young woman in the photograph. She played for the baby in the blanket. She played for the lonely man listening, his eyes closed, tears tracing silent paths down his cheeks. And she played for herself, for the lost child who had carried this secret, beautiful map inside her all along. When she finished, the silence that followed was warm and full. The drive back to the diner was quiet, but the silence between them was different now. It wasn't empty or awkward. It was the quiet of two people sharing a tremendous, fragile secret dot as the car pulled up next to her old, dented sedan in the diner's empty lot. He spoke. "No matter what that test says," he said, his voice firm, "you have given me back a piece of her I thought was lost forever. You have given me back the music." She nodded, unable to find words. "Will you come back tomorrow?" he asked. There was a vulnerability in the question, a fear of being told no. Not for the results. Just to talk. Or to play. The piano misses being played properly. She looked at the glowing windows of the diner, her simple, hard, predictable world. Then she looked at his anxious, hopeful face in the dim car light. "Yes," she said. "I'll come back." She got into her own car and watched the sleek black vehicle glide away. She sat there for a long time in the dark parking lot, the rain having stopped. The echo of the perfect piano was still in her ears, mixing with the memory of the broken diner keys. For the first time in her life, the song in her head didn't feel like a ghost. It felt like a key, and it had just unlocked a door to a past, and maybe a future she never knew was waiting. The next few days were a strange kind of limbo. She went to work. She wiped tables, poured coffee, and smiled at the regulars. The diner felt both the same and completely different. The broken piano in the corner was no longer just a piece of junk. It was a landmark, the place where her life had split into a before and an after. Every evening, after her shift, the sleek car would be waiting. The driver would give her a respectful nod and take her to the towering building in the sky. She no longer felt like an intruder in the grand apartment. She would go straight to the music room. The man would often be there, sitting in a high-backed chair by the window, just listening. She played, not just a lullaby, but other things. Simple tunes, songs from the radio, bits and pieces that came to her. He never interrupted, never asked for anything specific. His presence was like a quiet shadow, a man soaking in a sound he had been starving for decades. They began to talk. Not long conversations at first, just little things around the edges of the music. What was she like? She asked one night, her fingers resting on the keys after playing a folk song. He smiled, a real one that softened his whole face. Stubborn. Incredibly stubborn. If she had an idea for a melody, she would forget to eat, forget to sleep. She'd be humming it while walking down the street, almost getting hit by traffic. She saw the world in musical terms. A minor key for a gray sky. A staccato rhythm for typing on a keyboard. He paused. She believed music could heal anything. A broken heart, a bad day, a lonely soul. She thought about that. About how the lullaby had been a comfort to her, a constant friend in a ruthless life. Maybe it had done its job after all. And you? She asked another time. How did you two meet? University library, he said. I was studying engineering, all numbers and logic. She was in a study carrel, not reading, but scribbling notes on a napkin, completely stuck. I offered to buy her a coffee. She said she'd trade me a coffee for a solution to a musical problem. I knew nothing about music, but I saw it as a math puzzle. We solved it together. We were friends from that moment. He told her how Cora's husband was a painter, a kind man with gentle hands who loved to listen to her practice. How their small apartment was always full of art and sound and laughter. How it was the only real home he'd ever known, before it was all swept away. In return, she told him little things. About moving from home to home as a kid. About the good foster mother who taught her to bake, and the bad one who locked the pantry. About how waitressing was hard, but it was honest, and she liked the rhythm of it. She told him about the melody in her head, how it was her secret comfort during scary nights in strange beds. They were building a bridge, word by word, note by note, across a chasm of money and time and experience. Then, on the fourth day, the call came. She was in the music room, attempting a simple classical piece he'd suggested. He was watching from his chair when his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, and his whole body went still. The color drained from his face. He stood up, his movements slow and heavy. "It's the results," he said, his voice flat. The beautiful music in the room seemed to die instantly. The air grew cold. All the easy conversation of the past few days vanished, replaced by the heavy, waiting silence from the first night in the diner. This was the moment that defined everything. "I'll take it in my study," he said, not looking at her. "Please, wait here." He left, closing the door softly behind him. She was alone with the grand piano. She lifted her hands from the keys, suddenly afraid to touch them. What if the test said no? What if this whole incredible story was just a cruel coincidence? She would lose this room, this connection, this fragile sense of belonging to a story bigger than herself. He would be a lonely billionaire again, and she would go back to being just the waitress, with a memory now too painful to ever play again. She stared out the window at the city below. From up here, everyone looked so small, their lives invisible. Was her life about to shrink back down to a tiny, unseen dot? The door opened. He walked back in. He held a single sheet of paper. His face was unreadable, a mask of control. He walked over to the piano and stood beside it, looking down at the sheet of music still open on the stand, Cora's lullaby. He didn't speak for a long minute. She couldn't breathe. Finally, he let out a slow, shaky sigh. The mask cracked, and what was beneath wasn't joy or triumph. It was a profound, overwhelming sorrow. "The test confirms it," he said, his words measured and careful. "You are Cora's daughter. Biologically, you are her heir." There it was. The truth. It was real. She was the baby in the blanket. A wave of dizziness washed over her. She was someone's daughter. She had a mother who had a name, a face, a laugh. She had a history. But looking at his face, she felt no urge to celebrate. His eyes were filled with a grief so fresh it looked new. "I failed," he whispered, the words torn from him. "All these years, all this money, all this power. I built an empire to find you, to give you everything. And you were right here. You were working in a diner. Your hands were hurting from scrubbing floors. You were living in an apartment with a dripping faucet. I have boxes of her things, her favorite scarf, her books, and you have nothing." A tear finally escaped, tracing a path down his cheek. "I promised her I would find you, and I was decades too late." He wasn't seeing a miracle. He was seeing his own life's failure. The guilt he had carried since the accident had just been made concrete, undeniable. She stood up from the piano bench. She walked over to him. She didn't know what to do, so she simply took the test results from his limp hand and placed them on the piano. Then she did the only thing that felt right. She reached out and took one of his hands in both of hers. His hand was large and cold. Hers were small and warm from playing. "You didn't fail," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "You looked for me. That matters. And you found me. Not because of your money or your detectives. You found me because of her. Because of the song she gave me. The song you remembered. That's how we found each other." He looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face, searching for forgiveness she was already giving. "You asked me what I wanted that first night," she said. "I didn't know then. But I think I know now. Anything," he said, the word a vow. "I don't want boxes of things," she said. "I don't want a penthouse. I want to know her. I want you to tell me everything, every little story, until I can almost remember her myself." And she took a deep breath. "I want to do what she would have done." She believed music could heal, right? He nodded, confused. "Then that's what I want. Not to be an heiress. To be a bridge between her music and people like me. People who are lonely or lost or just having a bad day. People who think a beautiful piano isn't for them. A new light began to dawn in his eyes, slowly pushing back the grief. It was the light of a purpose, a shared one. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking about that broken piano in the diner," she said, a small smile touching her lips. "It's not broken. It's waiting. And I'll bet there are a lot of pianos like it, waiting in corners for someone to remember they can make music." He held her hand tighter, the connection now solid, real, and alive. "Then that," he said, a new strength in his voice, "is what we will do, together, for Cora." The inheritance wasn't a bank account or a piece of jewelry. It was a mission. And for the first time since that rainy night, they both knew exactly what to do next. The past was settled. The future was a song they had yet to write, and they would write it side by side. A year later, the old diner looked the same from the outside. The same neon sign, the same slightly dirty windows. But inside, the air hummed with a different energy. The smell of coffee was still there, but now it mixed with the scent of fresh wood and lemon polish. The broken piano was gone. In its place, right there in the corner by the plastic fern, stood a beautiful, restored, upright piano. Its wood glowed a warm honey color. A simple, hand-painted sign on the music stand read, "Play me, I'm yours." She stood behind the counter, not in a waitress uniform, but in simple, comfortable clothes. She was refilling a customer's coffee, smiling at something he said. She still worked here most days, but she was no longer just the waitress. She was the manager, and the heart of something new. The bell over the door jingled, and the man walked in. He wasn't in a fancy coat today, just a simple sweater. He looked around, his eyes taking in the bustling scene. The diner was fuller than it used to be. At the piano, a young construction worker on his lunch break was carefully picking out the melody to a popular song with one finger. An older woman at a nearby table smiled, tapping her foot. He walked over to the counter and slid onto a stool. She poured him a cup of coffee without asking, the way he liked it. "It sounds good," he said, nodding toward the piano. "The room. It sounds alive." "It feels alive," she replied, wiping the counter with a clean cloth. "We had a kid in here yesterday, maybe 10 years old. His mom said he's been coming in every day after school for a week, teaching himself from that beginner's book we keep on the bench. He played Twinkle, Twinkle all the way through. The whole place applauded. I thought his smile would split his face." He sipped his coffee, watching her. The tightness that used to live around his eyes was gone. He looked at peace. "How many now?" "7, she said, a proud glint in her eye. 7 diners, 3 community centers, and that old laundromat on 5th Street with the amazing acoustics. All with a restored piano, free lessons twice a week, and an open invitation. This was their project. They called it the Corner Piano Initiative. No big charity galas, no flashy logos. Just finding old, forgotten pianos, fixing them up, and putting them back in the heart of everyday places. With a teacher nearby to help anyone who wanted to learn. It was her idea. His money and connections made it possible, but her spirit, Cora's spirit, gave it life. It was the exact opposite of his quiet, lonely penthouse. It was music where it was needed most, in the middle of the noise and the grind. "And the foundation?" she asked. He had stepped back from running his main business, putting his energy into the Clara Vance Foundation, named for her mother. "Good," he said. "The music therapy pilot at the Children's Hospital is expanding. The instruments arrived at the youth center." He paused. They asked again if he'd come speak at the annual meeting. "Tell your story." She shook her head, not with fear, but with certainty. "That's not my part of the stage. My part is here, pouring the coffee, showing a kid where middle C is. The story. The story is in the music now. It doesn't need me talking about it." He understood. He had learned that from her. The work was the thing. The connection was the thing, not the spotlight. Later that evening, they stood in the grand music room of the penthouse for the last time. The room was almost empty. The beautiful grand piano was gone, already on a truck headed for the city's main public library, where it would sit in the grand atrium, free for anyone to play. All that was left in the center of the room were two simple chairs, and on one of them, a small, elegant box. She was nervous. Tonight was the Foundation's big annual concert, a fundraiser that paid for all their corner pianos and music programs. It was held in a famous concert hall. He had asked her, months ago, if she would play. Not just anything. He asked if she would play Aria for a Sleeping Child. The complete version, with the bridge she remembered. She had said no over and over. It was too private. It was hers. It was her mother's. The thought of playing it for a huge, formal audience in fancy clothes made her feel sick. But he had asked one more time, a week ago. Not for them, he had said. For the people who aren't in the room. For the single mom who hears a free lesson through an open community center window. For the tired bus driver who sits down at the piano in a laundromat for 5 minutes of peace. Play it for the people in the corners. They are your audience. She had finally agreed. Now, he opened the box. Inside, nestled on dark velvet, was not a fancy gown, but a simple, beautifully cut dress in a deep blue. It looked like something a musician would wear. Comfortable, elegant, real. It was your mother's, he said softly. She wore it for her only big concert at university. I think she'd want you to have it. She touched the fabric, her throat tight. It wasn't a costume. It was an heirloom. Hours later, she stood in the wings of the magnificent concert hall. She could hear the murmur of 1,000 people out there. She felt the weight of her mother's dress, the strange familiarity of it. Her heart was a wild drum in her chest. He stood next to her, in a simple tuxedo. He wasn't going to introduce her. They had decided there would be no big speech, no tragic story told to the crowd. The music would speak for itself. Look at me, he said. She turned her terrified eyes to him. You are not playing for them, he said, his voice calm and sure. You are playing for the girl in the diner who thought she was all alone. You are playing for your mother, who is so proud of you. You are playing for every person who ever needed a song to hold on to. Just go to the piano and come home. The announcer on stage spoke her name, just her name and the name of the piece. There was a polite ripple of applause. She walked out. The stage lights were bright, hot. She could see the sea of blurred faces in the dark. She sat at the grand piano, a different one from his, but just as beautiful. For a second, her mind went blank with fear. Then she thought of the diner. She thought of the chipped keys of the old broken piano. She thought of the rainy night and the lonely feeling and the song that had risen up anyway. She placed her hands on the keys. And she came home. She began to play. The pure, clear notes of the lullaby filled the vast hall, washing over the audience. She played it not with flashy skill, but with feeling, with memory. She played the main melody, the one of love and loss. And then she came to the turn, the bridge. The music hesitated, questioned, and then soared into that beautiful, unwritten path, the journey away from sleep, the journey toward hope. As she played that part, she didn't see the crowd. She saw the construction workers' concentrated face. She saw the 10-year-old's triumphant smile. She saw her mother's face in the photograph, laughing. She saw the man, her friend, in the diner booth, his coffee cup shattering on the floor as a lost piece of his soul snapped back into place. The song came back to its final, gentle resolution. The last note hung in the air, soft and true, and then faded into a perfect, breathless silence. For a moment, nothing. Then the sound began. It wasn't just applause. It was a wave of feeling, a deep, shared understanding that they had not just heard a performance, but witnessed something true. People were on their feet. Back in the wings, the man watched, his hand over his heart. He was not crying for the past anymore. He was smiling for the future. She stood, gave a small, genuine bow to the piano, to the music itself, and walked off the stage. The noise of the crowd was like a distant ocean. She walked straight to him. He didn't say, "Well done." He simply opened his arms, and she stepped into them, a long, steady hug. They had done it. They had taken the lonely, broken pieces of the past and built something new, something whole. Later, long after the concert was over, they found themselves back at the diner. It was closed, dark, and quiet. She had changed back into her ordinary clothes. She put on a pot of coffee, the old way, just for the two of them. They sat in a booth, the way they had that first night, but everything was different. "You know," she said, staring into her mug, "I think I finally know where I learned that tune." He looked at her, curious. "I learned it from her, of course," she said. "But I also learned it from you, from your memory of it, and from every lonely kid who needs to hear it. It's not just a lullaby anymore. It's a conversation." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Outside, the city lights shone. Somewhere in a community center, or a laundromat, or a library, a piano was waiting. And in the quiet of the diner, the two of them just sat, listening to the comfortable silence. A family finally found, built not just by blood, but by a song and the courage to play it on a broken piano in the dark.